Ahlan wa sahlan. This is our Middle East. I'm Dan Diker. Al-Sharq al-Awsat lana ma'an. All of us together, Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Turkomans, Baluchis, Alawis, you name it. This is a huge, complex, diverse, multicultural Middle East. And our program, Our Middle East, presents Israel as a small but ancient indigenous member of this Arab Muslim majority Middle East. Today, Jewish revival and religious reconciliation for the first time in centuries. And we have one of the pioneering young rabbis who is making history in Abu Dhabi. Please join us. We've got a lot to talk about. Rabbi Toledo, you are making history, the first young a rabbi and rabbinical scholar in residence in Abu Dhabi, the first time in 100 years, right, that there has been a revival of this sort. What does it feel like to be making history in the Arab Muslim Middle East as a government-mandated rabbi in the United Arab Emirates?
Well, good morning, Dan. It's great to be here. I appreciate you having us on this morning. It's an incredible privilege and opportunity to be part of this unique moment in history. This is the first purpose-built synagogue in the Gulf in nearly 100 years. Of course, the Jewish story in the UAE has now been documented in a number of films and articles and has been growing with increasing strength for the past 15 years. But of course, the Moses ben Maimon Synagogue, which opened this past winter in Abu Dhabi at the Abrahamic family house, is the first purpose-built synagogue in the region in nearly 100 years.
When you say purpose-built synagogue, you mean to say that the government of the United Arab Emirates, under the mandate and with the blessing of Mohammed bin Zayed, the leader of the UAE, has essentially instructed the UAE to make you a government employee in the name of religious and cultural pluralism.
Correct. One of the most unique pieces of the religious story in the UAE today is, of course, that UAE is home to over 200 nationalities and ethnic groups. And one of the trademark traits of the UAE, which actually goes back to the founding of Sheikh Zayed, the founder of UAE in the 1970s, was this commitment to tolerance. And so, as such, in 2017, the UAE government actually established a Ministry of State for Tolerance and Cooperation and appointed Sheikh Nahyan, a member of the royal family and a trusted advisor of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of UAE, to lead that ministry. Under Sheikh Nahyan's leadership, in 2019, the UAE actually held a year of tolerance. It was a year-long curriculum devoted to embracing and displaying these values, essentially saying to all of the religious communities that call UAE home, we don't only want you to survive here, we want you to thrive. And that year of tolerance culminated in a papal visit, the first time that the Pope actually visited the Arabian Peninsula in the history of the papacy, where the Pope Francis, was met by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University in Egypt. And together at that meeting, they signed what was called the Document for Human Fraternity and Mutual Cooperation. This document outlined in concrete detail this history of commitment to embrace, to tolerance, to welcoming all those who call UAE home. And of course, the UAE does things big. And so the document wasn't just enough. They wanted to put it into action. And so at that event, shortly after that event, they announced that they would be taking that document and putting it into action by building the Abrahamic family house in the center of Abu Dhabi, in the center of the cultural district.
What's compelling about what I'm hearing from you is that the Abraham family house also is home not only to you, Rabbi Toledo, but also to Christian leaders and also an imam in the same residential area.
Correct. So the Abrahamic family house is actually a very unique multi-faith complex. It houses a mosque, a church, and a synagogue, all exactly the same physical size, all the same height, but totally different in terms of use proposition and internal functionality. Each building is separate but connected by a garden and a forum below for events that are hosted together. And this space, while not the first of its kind in terms of a complex that houses 3 houses of worship, for example, is the first of its kind in terms of the investment and in terms of the ambition to share that we have so much more in common than we do that separates ourselves.
Are you, is there this faith-based diplomacy reality in practice? Are you having events together? Are you having roundtables together, consultations together?
Correct. So as I said, the Abrahamic family house actually opened in February this past year. So we're really about 6 months in. And there was, of course, a strategic opening. The first phase, which was not simple, was from the announcement of the building to basically opening the doors, which happened in remarkable time from the announcement in 2019 till opening February this past year. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 was really about, and we're still in it, is really about establishing each of the houses of worship within their local residential religious communities. So for each house of worship, that looks, of course, different based on the nature of the constituency in Abu Dhabi. But that's really been the focus of this, I would call it phase 2, for lack of a better word. And of course, the Abrahamic family house aspires to be a leader, not just in terms of events, but in terms of publications, in terms of sharing this message with the broader world. And I think that will come later this fall or perhaps winter in terms of beginning to flex that interfaith muscle, holding conferences, publishing papers, etc., on the commonality of these faiths, but of course recognizing that they have important and unique particularistic differences.
You talk about the flexing of interfaith muscles. How about flexing Jewish muscles? I understand there are some 300 Jews that come daily to the Maimonides home or synagogue in Abu Dhabi. Is that the case?
Correct. So one of the things that makes this role so interesting is the multifaceted nature of it. We really have 3 distinct constituencies in terms of how we think about who are we servicing, what are we doing there. The first and primary, of course, is the residential Jewish community. At the moment, as you said, it's about 300 Jews living in Abu Dhabi full-time. And of course, that number is growing literally by the week. And from that perspective, our role looks very similar to any community rabbi anywhere in the world. And that's part and parcel of the mission, that this is, of course, a broader interfaith, multi-faith complex with ambitions beyond the 4 walls. But fundamentally, in order for it to be successful, it has to be a living, breathing, robust synagogue in the same way you would find anywhere in the world. So in that spirit, we've had bar mitzvahs, we've had proposals, we've had weddings, we've had baby namings, both girls and boys. And so from that perspective, it's very similar. Now, the second constituency is the one that is producing very large numbers in terms of visiting delegations, politicians, diplomats, groups from really all over the world. And really in the initial 6 months period, it's really already become a magnet in the organized Jewish world. We've already hosted delegations from really almost all of the major American Jewish organizations, some from Canada and even from the UK. And then, of course, the third constituency is the non-Jewish community. On a weekly basis, the Abrahamic family house hosts about 7,000 tourists. Now, many of those visitors are both coming as worshipers and also coming to learn about the other faiths. One of the unique elements of this synagogue is that for many of these non-Jewish visitors or worshipers, it's actually one of the first, if not only, times in their lives that they've actually been able to step into a synagogue, let alone meet a rabbi. Unfortunately today, as you know, the security situation in much of the world makes it almost impossible if you're a non-Jew to visit a synagogue almost anywhere you go in the world. But here it's actually the opposite. They're invited in, they're invited to ask questions, they're invited to interact with us. And that's one of the most meaningful and fruitful pieces of this role, is that daily interaction. Just last week, I had a knock on my door, and I had this really wonderful Indian girl who just graduated college. She was visiting Abu Dhabi with her parents, and she literally, I kid you not, had a yellow notepad with 15 thoughtful questions about Judaism. And she said, could we sit and talk? I've never had an opportunity, but I've always been interested. I studied in university, and I want to learn about these things. And so it's a very, very powerful experience.
You come from, you're a graduate of the Strauss Rabbinical School at Ohr Torah Stone institutions, which is one of the most outstanding institutions for training rabbis for international work. How has your training at Ohr Torah Stone served you in this historic role?
It's funny, when my wife and I, Rabbi Nitiel, made Aliyah to Israel about 4 years ago, and I joined the Strauss Kola Yeshivat Machanaim under the leadership of Ohr Torah Stone. I came to the Rosh Kola, Rav Eliyahu Gatano, and I said to him, we just made Aliyah. I know that the yeshiva likes to send students out on shlichut, but I'm actually not interested in going on shlichut. We made Aliyah because we want to live and we want to work in Israel. And really that thought process was very simply that, we loved America and we have nothing but appreciation for it, but we came to Israel because we wanted to be part of the greatest project and most important project in the Jewish world, which of course is Israel, full stop. But as they say, man plans and God laughs, right? And so when this opportunity arose, I think when we look around the Jewish world, and this gets to how did Ohr Torah help me, was Ohr Torah Stone help me with the perspective of looking around the Jewish world and recognizing that, of course, Israel today is the most consequential Jewish project in the world, but perhaps outside of Israel, what is happening, the revolution, the emergence of a dynamic and robust and growing Jewish community in the Gulf is perhaps one of the most important and consequential frontiers in the Jewish world. And so that guidance, that ethos of shlichut, of going out and spreading Torah values, and really living up to the injunction of being an Or L'Goyim, being a light into the nation, was something that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. And I'm incredibly grateful and grateful to my teachers at Ohr Torah Stone, specifically Rav Eliyahu Gatano, for his guidance, which has been nearly on a weekly basis. We're in touch and been helpful on that.
I can share the excitement and the appreciation for Ohr Torah Stone, having myself left the comforts and protection, if you will, of the wings of the United States back in the late 1980s, and cut short a business school experience at Harvard, and left at the urging of Rabbi Riskin. He should live to be healthy to 120, invited me to his home and hosted me for a Shabbat, encouraged me to study for those 3 years at Ohr Torah Stone. And that, in a way, here has brought me, in a sense, Rabbi, to speak with you about Ohr Torah Stone's shlichut. And in a way, this program, Our Middle East, is very much a product of the vision of Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, who believed back in the early 1980s that spreading the principles and the values of Torah beyond the borders of Israel and beyond the diaspora Jewish communities as they were then could actually reach this day, in this moment in the Gulf. And then, of course, one of his great students and colleagues, Rabbi Catriel Brander, who today is the president of Ohr Torah Stone, shares those values and the vision. So I think it's really, it's a great credit to Ohr Torah Stone to have this global vision of what modern adaptation of ancient Torah values can be in connecting to some of our historic partners. And here we are in the Gulf. I just sort of put this together as I was hearing your very eloquent explanation about how you evolved from Ohr Torah stone.
Absolutely, and I think I mentioned to you earlier before we entered the studio that we can't connect history moving forward, but we can connect the dots looking backwards. And one of the formative religious experiences of my life was in 2015 when I was here in Israel on a gap year. I was invited very graciously by Rabbi Riskin and his wife to join them in a frat for a Shabbat, which proved to be one of the most impactful experiences of my life. And over that Shabbat, late nights of conversation, Rabbi Riskin was incredibly inspiring and influential in terms of my decision to ultimately pursue rabbinical school. And I knew when we made Aliyah that Ohr Torah stone was absolutely the path to go down. And I'm incredibly grateful. And of course for Rabbi Brander as well, who has taken that baton and carried it forward so strongly. And has also been an incredible mentor along this journey.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about some of the Rabbanim, the rabbis at Ohr Torah stones, the great Rabbi Dr. David Ebner, who was there for so many years and taught the Rambam, Maimonides, to us as a foundational ethical document. And here you are in the Maimonides Bet Knesset, the synagogue. Is there not a small touch of irony that the Rambam, that Maimonides was perhaps the most celebrated and Jewish leader of Egypt in medieval times, and here he has been sort of reestablished in the strangest of places where he may not have understood that he would be revived in the 21st century in the Gulf as opposed to in Egypt, where he was the medical, he was the physician to the Sultan and other senior and other leaders of at that time in medieval Egypt.
Absolutely, as I'm sure you're aware, there's no coincidence in terms of the naming of the synagogue. I think when the leadership, specifically Chief Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, was involved in the consultation on the Abrahamic family house during its development phase, and when they came up with together the name to name the synagogue in honor of Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, it was not a coincidence. And of course, the Rambam, while he didn't live in the UAE, he certainly functioned in this region and functioned in this language. I mean, the Judeo-Arabic of his writing is seen most chiefly throughout his works. And that is a legacy that is emblematic, I think, of the vision and the idealism of what this religious moment, this revival moment in the region represents. Of course, the ingenuity, of course, the indigeneity. Of course, the indigeneity of the Jews in the region is something that goes back 3,600 years. I mean, you just, obviously not as robustly in UAE, but really around the area. And so it's not totally unusual that you would have this moment happening here. This is where our religions, both Judaism and Islam, came to be, and of course lived together for so many years. We have so much in common, namely the one God. And this moment is an embrace of that cultural unity, and it's one that we represent and try to share in terms of our mutual values on a daily basis. I'll just share very quickly one of the most powerful moments of the last 8 months of living in Abu Dhabi has been actually the staff training at the Abrahamic family house. One of the series of ongoing educational initiatives that we've developed is actually a staff religious explanation series. And so myself, the imam, and the priest are giving the staff a series of 3 lectures about each of the religions. And you see the beautiful differences, but of course the similarities through those presentations and through the way in which we all come together.
It seems to me, Rabbi Toledo, that you've created a prototype here under the watchful eye and the generous blessing of the UAE government, Mohammed bin Zayed at its head, to create a completely new embodiment of faith-based diplomacy, of really beginning to connect faith leaders in Abu Dhabi and from around the Arab world, all of whom have great respect for the UAE. And so there that you are, it's not that you're just a rabbi in a synagogue that was built by the local Jewish community or the international Jewish community, or more commonly, the American Jewish community, as happens so frequently. But in fact, you are a product of a concept of tolerance and a concept of mutual embrace between the three monotheistic religions by the UAE government. I'm wondering whether this really has the potential of beginning to spread the truth of Abrahamic history and legacy and heritage to others, to other countries in the Arab world.
I think we should be careful not to over-pathologize the political impact of an institution like that. And the truth is, I think we should be careful not to over-politicize the impact of the Abrahamic family house. And the truth is, the goal is not to solve complicated geopolitical problems. The goal is to be, first and foremost, a functioning, thriving, growing center, multi-faith center for three houses of worship. However, we can't ignore the fact that certainly this is located within a moment of tremendous reconciliation and growth in the region.
We're kind of both, I would say, intellectually brainstorming, because this is such an unusual moment when we think through the multiple implications of what we're discussing this morning. It's absolutely, you want to pinch yourself to think that here you are a rabbi, in an ancient Muslim Arab country that for years did not have any relations with the state of Israel, and now is embracing Jews and also normalizing relations with Israel. And what comes up ultimately in the collective Jewish community here in the one and only Jewish and democratic state, the state of Israel, is whether our Arab partners are accepting us as an indigenous member of the Arab Muslim majority Middle East, or is it more of a practical acceptance on the one hand, and on a purely theological level of individual tolerance, because they use that word tolerance as opposed to collective embrace, whether they're accepting a de facto existence of the Jews and the Jewish state. It's just sort of an open question.
Correct. I mean, I think when we speak about the Abrahamic family house, we need to be careful not to overly pathologize the implications on a political level. This is not going to solve complicated geopolitical problems, and that's not the goal. The goal is really to be a dynamic multi-faith institution that houses three vibrant houses of worship. And of course, part and parcel of that mission is this people-to-people interaction. I think whatever happens on the diplomatic level, the phase that is really so critical to all peoples is that one-on-one interaction. It's getting to know each other. It's sharing each other's culture. It's inviting each other for a meal, breaking bread together. And that's one of the unique potentials of this synagogue. And I should mention also that as a result of the mandate, of course, this is a project of the Abu Dhabi culture of, this is a project of the Abu Dhabi Ministry of Culture and Tourism that not only has built and continues to fund the synagogue, but also wants this project not just to be a multi-faith exercise, but actually an intra-faith exercise as well. One of the unique elements of the Moses ben Maimon synagogue is that it's the Jewish synagogue. As I said, it's the first purpose-built synagogue in 100 years in the region. The last one was in Manama in Bahrain, the Ten Commandments house. But as such, this is the Jewish synagogue. And very intentionally, understanding the nature of synagogue life. I mean, you're looking at me and I can see on your face, there is no such thing as a Jewish synagogue. There are Reform synagogues and conservative synagogues and Orthodox synagogues and Chabad synagogues. But the government of Abu Dhabi said, no, this is going to be the Jewish synagogue. This is not going to be Young Israel of Abu Dhabi. This is not going to be Chabad of Abu Dhabi. This is not going to be the Reform Temple of Abu Dhabi. This is going to be the synagogue for the Jewish community. And in that spirit, under the leadership of Chief Rabbi Sarna and myself, we worked with Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis of the British Commonwealth and his team to develop a standard operating procedure in order to execute that mandate on the highest level. So while Rabbi Sarna and myself are Orthodox rabbis, and it's important that we follow halakha, Jewish law, we work to be as embracing and as catering to all of the Jews who call UAE home, and of course all of the visiting Jews as well, which is an important piece of this project and something that I think our neighbors recognize. And the last piece to your question that I would just mention is that this is a very traditional region, right? This is a region that is deeply religious, deeply observant, deeply connected to traditional values and traditional ways of life. And one of the strongest ways that we can make a Kiddush Hashem, we can make a sanctification of God's name in this world here in Abu Dhabi, is to embrace that traditionalism that Judaism has to offer. And that's what's happening at the synagogue. I mean, so often, so many of the people who are coming through the synagogue are not necessarily frequent synagogue goers in their normal lives. But something about the confluence of being in an Arab country and seeing the way in which not only they respect the Jewish faith, but that they honor the Jewish faith by building this gorgeous synagogue and being in this beautiful multi-faith center that embraces and welcomes the traditionalism of each of the religions.
So it doesn't bother. So what I'm understanding is that if I'm a Reform, conservative, or Reconstructionist Jew from a community that reflects those traditions in the West, doesn't necessarily disturb people when they come into a different Jewish and Arab cultural milieu.
Really one of the most powerful things that happens, and literally on an almost daily basis, as I said, we have 7,000 visitors a week, roughly, so it happens literally on an almost daily basis, is we have these Jews coming from all over the world who come into the synagogue, and they're overwhelmed by this embrace. And even if they're not normally accustomed to wearing a kippah, to putting on a talit, a prayer shawl, wrapping tefillin, they want to do these things. They want to say Tehillim with me. They want to join us for the services. It's a very powerful, powerful experience to see.
Isn't that something, What's the role of history? I want to zoom out for the next 3 minutes of our chat and talk about the importance of spreading or helping to educate people in Abu Dhabi and in the Gulf and in the larger Arab world about the history of Jews in Arab lands, because there is such a rich 2,500-year history of Jewish life in Arab lands. I mean, that's not to speak of the fact that Abraham himself has nearly a 5,000-year history. He was going around, to the Jewish version of Dawah. He was preaching values and monotheism in advance of the birth of Islam, of Judaism, Islam, and ultimately Christianity. And the question is that there's a role here for some sort of faith-based shared historical tradition, so that that kind of what they call in Arabic tatbiya, normalization, has historical roots to it.
Absolutely. I think the second half of the 20th century witnessed really a profound reconciliation between the Jewish world and the Christian world, of course, culminating in Vatican II. What we're seeing in this generation in the first half of the 21st century is perhaps a similar, if not stronger, reconciliation, which, as you mentioned, is actually not a new idea. It's actually a return to what was. Jews have lived in this region for almost our entire history. This is the region that was the birthplace of both Judaism and Islam and ultimately Christianity.
Yeah, Jews in Yemen.
And we see Jewish communities very strongly in Yemen. We have Jews, of course, from Iraq,
Tunisia, from Iraq.
In Iraq, the Jewish community probably was there from about 600 BCE from the Babylonian exile. And we have, of course, even some small semblance of Jewish communities. I was speaking with the former American ambassador and current director of the American Jewish Committee's office in Abu Dhabi, Mark Sievers, just last week, and he was telling me that in the northern port city of Sohar in Oman, there's actually a Jewish cemetery. We have writings of certain scholars, Rabbi Benjamin of
Toledo.
From the year 1100 of his journeys, probably in the area of what is today Ras Al Khaimah, which is the northernmost emirate in the UAE. Of course, we have a tremendous history in Iran of Jews, and of course Morocco and Egypt. So it's really a return to that community of nations there.
Wow, this is really an exciting moment for the Jewish world. I think for Islam, for the cause of freedom and open interaction certainly between Islam and Judaism. We need to continue this conversation. We want to maintain our commitment to keeping our conversation compact and to the point. I think we've done that, and I think we've honored our great teachers, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, Rabbi Catriel Brander, the Or Torah Stone institutions, as well as Mohammed bin Zayed, and the great, courageous leadership of His Majesty Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE, creating an example for the world of what tolerance and goodwill and embrace of monotheistic cultures can actually bear. So Rabbi Ben de Toledo, the first rabbi in a revived Jewish community in the Middle East here in 2023. Thank you so much for joining us on Our Middle East. It's a wonderful conversation and celebration of Jewish revival and religious reconciliation in the modern Middle East.
Well, thank you, Dan, and we look forward to welcoming you in Abu Dhabi shortly.
I'm on the way. Okay. I'm on the way. God willing. Nir Tashem. Inshallah. Inshallah. Thank you very much. This has been Al Shakal Al Sat Lana Man, Our Middle East together. Join us again next week. We'll bring you more action and more entrepreneurial ideas in an emerging Middle East with all of its dangers and opportunities together.